Good afternoon. Happy Friday, everybody. It's my favorite time of the week, my weekly wrap-up live stream. And we are going to talk all about the jobs report today because it's the biggest topic in finance. And guys, I'll tell you, we reported the jobs initially this morning on my morning live stream, and the comments were overwhelmingly negative. I mean, people were like not holding back this morning. Basically, nobody believes the numbers. Nobody, at least nobody in this audience, seemed to believe the numbers. Now, I try not to just lob that out there and just be like, it's so easy to just point and say they lie. It's so easy to just point and say the government makes things up, even though, let's be honest, we all know the government makes things up. Okay, I mean, should we do this? Should we do a little bit of this today? You know, where's my man Yogurt here? There he is. Yeah, merchandising. That's what it's all about. I think we need a little bit of this today because there was a lot of things in the Nonfarm Payrolls report that didn't make any sense. And let's be honest, guys. Most people, all the indicators up until this week were showing a very rapidly deteriorating labor market, so much so that the Fed panicked and did their 50 basis point rate cut after having Nick Timiraos try to smooth over that messaging for us with the conspicuous leak and everything, and then they cut 50. Well, guess what? Have you guys seen the CME futures today about what's going on with projections for Fed rate cuts now? No cut is now on the table. It's still a slim margin here, but this morning or yesterday, we were looking at like 2/3 of people were saying a 25 basis point cut and 1/3 were saying 50. Then this morning, it comes out a little bit less so. It was like almost overwhelmingly this morning was saying 25. And now we've actually got no rate cut is on the table. That's interesting. So the Fed overshot with the first rate cut. And now everybody's like wondering, is inflation going to come back? But let's be honest, guys, this jobs report, this is the most amazing number since, North Korea reported potato yields at their farms, right? It's got a lot of people raising questions. Even Mohammed El-Arian was on Twitter today and on CNBC suggesting very softly, I mean, he didn't quite put this on, but he put some hints in there that like, guys, some of this stuff doesn't quite smell right. Of course, everybody is crying politics. We're inside of a month of the election now. And so everybody is viewing everything through the lens of the election and political motivations that obviously can't be ignored. So we're going to look very closely here at the numbers. We're going to look into the attachments. We're going to go through the change in the month and the year over year. And we're just going to ask, does this make sense? Because there's one big factor that's going to play out here, and that's going to be seasonal adjustment is a very big one. Now, normally every month there is a seasonal fudge factor, but September in particular is vulnerable here because, well, what happens in September? Back to school, right? All the summer jobs go away and all the teachers go back to work. And so you tend to get a very big seasonal adjustment at this time of year. It's to be expected, but it turns out this was actually the biggest seasonal adjustment of any September going back for the last 22 years. So yes, a big seasonal adjustment was expected, but it was a really big seasonal adjustment. And even when you take away the seasonal adjustments, when you look at some of the non-seasonally adjusted numbers, there are some numbers in this report that just make you say, no way. This defies logic. This does not pass the sniff test. Now, all of these things, do they combine to form this wonderful Voltron of tinfoil that says this jobs report is a lie? Probably not. But there's enough numbers in here that are just so, say, incongruous, just so such departures from the norm and from everything else we're hearing in the media that at the very least they warrant a little bit of skepticism. And rather than just point and say lie, we're actually going to inform that decision. We're actually going to get into the math and to the numbers and actually look at that. But before we do any of that, we've got to shrink my big melon of a head. You've got to hit that like button. You've got to subscribe if you're new here. And we got to say hi to my moderator, Mish, who is back with us once again. How are we doing today, Mish?
I'm doing pretty good. Still hanging out in Lincoln, though I am going to go to a Renaissance Fair this weekend.
We were just talking about the Ren Fair. I've been to one Ren Fair in my life. I did not cosplay, and we verified that it was not offensive to refer to Renaissance Fair enthusiasts as cosplayers. I was there with the girls, but it was a blast. And Mish, I just think I picture you just thriving at a Renaissance fair, brother. I think that you are like totally at home in your element. I'm a little jealous that I am not going to be renaissancing with you this weekend. So please.
Renaissancing. What
Yes.
I really need is with the beard, I need the whole friar coat now, the whole friar.
Going a little Friar Mish.
Yeah.
I was going to go a little more Viking. I was going to say, you know, please have a horn of ale for me while you're there. But I could see the friar thing, you know, like Friar Tuck. Do you ferment honey? Do you make mead in your spare time also?
I've been known to drink some mead.
Yeah. I don't discriminate when it comes to beverages of the mind-altering persuasion. I like to dabble in a little bit of everything. So I'll go mead if I have to. Anyways, let's get through the markets here, guys, because it's been kind of a bumpy day. All right. Markets were way up pre-market on the news of the jobs report. You can see that big spike there right at the open this morning. And we were saying on the morning live stream, it looks like good news is good news again. And then the market started to sell off. It very briefly went negative. At least some of the indexes very briefly went negative, but then resumed higher. So as of right now, we're still in the good news is bad news camp because stocks. Well, no, I think we're still in the good news is good news camp because stocks are up on the jobs numbers being up, but you can't ignore what's happening with yields today. So let's just look at the numbers and I'll stop talking so much. The S&P 500 is up 38 points, about 2/3 of 1% higher this afternoon. Again, big surge at the open, gave some back, and then we've been bouncing around and trending higher for the rest of the day. We're at 57.38 right now. And if you take a look at that chart, now we're going to zoom out a little bit. This is daily candles going back to about April. You can see we are not quite positive for the week, are we? Oh, we're like right there. We're right where we closed last week. If you look here, that's the wrong tool. Let's get rid of that. Give me my pen back. There we go. We're like right where we ended the week last week. So not quite an all-time high in the S&P, but we're close. Up another 38 points here. The Dow, meanwhile, on the day, up 253 points or 0.6% higher. Same pattern, big jump at the open, gave back some of that, and then bounced its way higher. Now, the Dow, looking at the long-term chart, we are now positive for the week, I believe. Let's see, we closed Friday about 42,240. We're 42,250. So, yes, we are positive for the week once again, and we are set to close at an all-time high for the Dow here at 42,251. The NASDAQ, meanwhile, I guess I don't have my chart set up quite right here. The NASDAQ is up 1%, 180 points to the upside here. Same pattern, big jump at the open, gave that back, and then grinding higher. Looks like we're catching a bit into the close as well. 18,093 for the NASDAQ. Zooming out here and the chart going back to the beginning of April, though, again, still not quite making a new high here. We had the all-time high for the NASDAQ was still back in July. We failed to recapture that in August. Now, we did take out the August highs about a week ago, but we're still well short of the high in tech stocks that we saw in July. We've had a little bit of secular rotation over these last couple of weeks as people have been dumping the high-flying techs, at least a little bit, and moving into the Dow, moving into your better-paying dividend and yield stocks. We've also had utilities have been doing very well on some of these announcements about investments in nuclear power to power data centers. So NASDAQ here, it's doing well, but not as well as the other two indexes. Now, also going on today, sharply stronger dollar, 53 basis points higher on the Dixie, 102.52. It's up by about 0.5%. It's a little strange to see stocks doing so well with the Dixie moving up in with such force here. I suspect one of these is going to have to give way. I thought that's what was happening with that sell-off at the opening bell. And just take a look at the long-term chart on the Dixie. Again, these are daily candles going back to about the beginning of April. Look at the week the U.S. dollar has had. Look at the strengthening. 1, 2, 3, 5 green candles in a row. The U.S. dollar has gone up in a straight line this week without end. I mean, no red in sight here. We've seen a lot of strengthening in the dollar. We've seen stocks do pretty well considering that. We've seen gold and silver do pretty well considering that. And the Japanese yen, keep an eye on that. It has weakened substantially. Remember, we started the week with some dovish comments from the supposed hawk who's about to take over in Japan, and the dollar has been rising ever since. Looking over at the bond market, big move in yields, especially in the middle of the yield curve here. It was a big move this morning off of the jobs report, and it has gotten bigger all day long. The 30-year is up almost 9 points, 4.268 on the 30-year. Look at the 10-year, pushing 4% here at 3.99. Hasn't quite taken out 4%, but that is up more than 13 basis points today, 3.49%. We're going to come back to the 10-year in a second because, guys, it's just gone pretty much straight up since the Fed cut rates. Somebody forgot to tell the long end of the yield curve that interest rates are going down because the long end isn't doing that. The 2-year, 3.928. That's up 21 points, almost 21 and a half. What? 3.928%. Is the yield curve going to reinvert? Is the 2 going to reinvert the 10? We're down to just 6 points and change of inversion here, or of uninversion. Big move in the 2-year. The 1 month at 4.868, even that's up 4 points today. Guys, people are pricing in a much less aggressive Federal Reserve here, and it shows. Check out this. This is the odds.
Hold on, Jack.
Oh, go ahead, Mitch.
This change in the 10 over the last week is going to start changing the mortgage rate here. So I'm curious next week on how it's going to affect the housing market.
You know, there was an article, I saw it flash a couple of times in the tickers about mortgage rates are starting to move now. So I do think we're going to see that start to reflect in some of those weekly housing numbers, like the mortgage applications. I think that's what you were alluding to in the refis. We did see a boom in refis over the last few weeks, but we haven't seen that in home purchases. And I don't think we're going to see it in home purchases, not now that yields are moving higher. And, also keep in mind with delinquencies are on the rise. They're still relatively low, but they're rising. Borrowing doesn't get cheaper when delinquencies rise. I don't care what the Fed does. The banks get more hesitant when delinquencies are on the rise. So that's a very good point. This is not good news for the housing market by any measure. We were going to show the Fed here, and look at this. I mean, guys, this is 25 basis points here. Now looking at a 96% likelihood, pretty much, if I'm rounding. And look, this is crept in here. We're looking at no rate cut. It's still only a 4% likelihood, 4.3% likelihood. But this didn't even register on the chart yesterday. Yesterday, everybody was still leaning towards 50, with the 25 being a minority. Now 25 is a near certainty, and no rate cut is on the table. So look, when the Fed cut by 50, they were pretty much admitting that they made a mistake, even though Nick Timiraos and all the financial press were very generous in flying cover for the Fed, that they didn't have to admit that the Fed made a mistake when they cut, or when they waited so long and then cut 50. But now what this is saying is the Fed also made a mistake when they cut by 50, right? So the 50 basis point cut was an admission in retrospect that they should have started cutting sooner. And now if we go back to not cutting or to cutting 25, they're saying maybe we were a little too aggressive out of the gate. Either way, Fed is still driving, looking in the rearview mirror, and they're making mistakes is what it seems like. And you got to take that with a grain of salt, because that is assuming that these jobs numbers are legit. And we're going to talk about the numbers again. That's not necessarily a safe assumption. Now, Mitch, to the point that you were making about mortgage rates, look at the 10-year here. And I just want to point something out, guys. September 18th, right here, that's when the Fed cut by 50 basis points. And that's why I kind of said, like, hey, guys, we forgot to tell the long end of the yield curve, because it's pretty much done nothing but go up ever since. We're sitting at 3.979 here. When the Fed actually made the cut, we were at something closer to 3.65. I mean, you're looking at more than 30 basis points of higher yields coming off the heels of a 50 basis point cut at the short end of the curve. I mean, what do you take away from this, Mish? Is this inflation expectation starting to take off again?
I think it's a little bit of that, but I also thought that the 10-year was way overbought right before. I think people were really, really buying up the 10-year. I think there's a little bit of risk evaluation going on there. And now what we're seeing, we're starting to see people come back off that risk play. But also, the market's, the curve's been like this, so it's kind of going to do this as it settles in. Yeah,
I agree with that sentiment that they probably got a little frothy in the bond market. And yeah, don't make me break out my glow sticks and turn on the techno here. If you keep doing that wavy thing, we're going to turn this into, I'll get Strong Bad's techno song playing in the background. The system is down is going to be in the back of my head now for the rest of the afternoon. That's taking me back to college. Anyways, I think you're right. I think the buying in the 10-year did get a little ahead of itself. Everybody was just like, pivot, it's coming. Soft landing. Yeah, everybody started piling into treasuries. And then it happened, and everybody's like, well, shit, now what? And it's done nothing but go up since then. And then, of course, today with the stronger than expected jobs number, you've got two things. You've got people are resetting expectations for further cuts, and you've probably got a couple of people are saying, uh-oh, is inflation going to make a comeback here? And, we mentioned this earlier this year. The Fed only controls the short end of the yield curve. The longer end of the yield curve is determined more based on risk. It's determined more based on inflation expectations. And I think with the Fed aggressively cutting, with Europe getting dovish, with China getting dovish, and with Japan, who was previously expected to get hawkish, now kind of waxing dovish a little bit, at least with their rhetoric, it makes sense that you would see inflation expectations start to pick up a little bit. So I think that's probably reflected a little bit here as well. And you had the yield curve at very rapidly uninverted after staying inverted for very long. Maybe you got a little bit of perturbations, which is kind of what I interpreted this to mean, is like maybe it overswung a little bit. Either way, borrowing costs on the long end are heading higher today.
Hey, before we get on, you got two.
We're too deep? Okay, let's see what we got here before we get into the Bitcoin here. T.A. Chapman. Thank you so much, T.A. Chapman, for being a melonhead for 3 months. He says, how's that silver and gold difference with China? I haven't looked at the China gold arbitrage for a while. Let me check the tweeter real quick. Actually, Mish, would you mind looking that up while we're going through? Could you see if what's that guy's name? I can't remember the guy's name who always posts the arbitrage between the Shanghai gold futures.
Something Zhui.
Bao, B-A-O.
Yeah,
Bai Xiaojun. There's one guy on Twitter who's always publishing it, but he posts the arbitrage opportunity. That's a good question. We haven't heard a lot about China gold and silver buying in the last month or two. Gold and silver, not silver, I should say, gold made the quietest all-time high I've ever seen over the last couple of weeks. Well, let me just bring up the silver chart, because since you asked, and while Mish is looking that up, silver had a pretty wild ride today. Now, we're still looking at daily candles here, going back to about the beginning of April. Now, we have finally taken out this red line, and we look set to close above it. That was the high that we had back in May, and then we failed to recapture that at the end of September. We're back at that level now. Now, if we get rid of the squiggles I just drew and we look at 1-minute charts, check out the move in silver that we had today. I don't know what this was, guys, but at the open, the silver buyers were going crazy. And then somebody called Mr. Slammy and took us right back down. And then we've kind of been range bound right at this resistance/support line ever since. So it was a pretty wild day. Gold did not move like this. Silver only made this big move today. So I'll be honest with you, I don't know what the heck this was, this big rise and then sell off, but whatever. We'll chalk that one up to Mr. Slammy. How does that sound? But silver still having a pretty good day, up 24 cents at 32.22. And I would say thank you very much to Mr. T.A. Chapman. I appreciate the super chat and the support of the channel. And Mish is going to jump in if he does find that Shanghai.
Yeah, I just have to figure out what 18.7 thousand divided by 7.1 is.
What, you mean you can't do that in your head? Come on, man. I've seen you do math before.
I don't know. Somewhere around 2.5, but
so if I had to guess, I'd say you probably still have an arbitrage opportunity, but we have seen that come in. It's shrunk quite a bit over the last few months, although I haven't looked at it in a few days, so I don't want to quote on that. But thank you very much, T.A. Chapman. And thank you to Jose Orozco.
Yeah, gold is 26.30.
26.30 in Shanghai is gold. So
yeah,
that's interesting. That's actually a little bit lower. That would be last night's price. Yeah. Gold's actually looks like it's trading a little bit lower. So the Shanghai arbitrage opportunity has evaporated then, if Mish's calculations are correct, and I have no reason to doubt that they are.
It was mostly silver anyway. I thought the gold the gold arbitrage is pretty slim.
Silver was the big one. Silver was consistently, at least earlier this year, it was consistently trading between $2 and $3 more expensive in China versus the U.S. on a per ounce basis. But there's a lot of math in there, right? Because you got the futures contract price, then has to be converted over to the yuan, and then has to be converted back to dollars, and then you've got the spot price of silver, and all of those numbers are constantly fluctuating. So we're getting into a little bit of Heisenberg's uncertainty here. By the time you do the math, it's too old and it's obsolete. So it's hard to nail it down.
We don't know what the cat's up to.
Yeah, exactly. That's was Schrodinger's Shanghai silver arbitrage. Thank you very much to Mr. Jose Orozco. Says, looking at the St. Louis Fed credit card debt chart, the slope looks to be slowing down, less steep. Do you think people are maxing out or paying down? I definitely don't think they're paying down. Mish, you were going to say something?
I think BNPL is masking the problem.
That is an awesome point, Mish, and I am 100% in agreement with you that BNPL is masking the problem. And more so, on top of that, Mish, I think BNPL may be masking the problem now, and it might actually accelerate it later on, because I've read a lot of articles about people paying their buy now, pay later loans with their credit cards. So that would mean you have a momentary flattening of the curve because of the buy now, pay later. And you can see the curve is definitely flattening, Jose. I see the same thing you see on that chart. But that also means as all these people pay off the loans on the credit cards, you're going to see it turn back upward. They're projecting even more buy now, pay later use this year as part of the Christmas shopping season. Guys, look, I'm still very skeptical of buy now, pay later. I know you guys have heard me talk about this. I just flat out do not believe a firm CEO and the numbers that he's saying about their delinquency rates. I just do not believe what he's saying. It does not pass the sniff test. I can't remember what the guy's name is. Max Levchin or Levchin was the guy's name. Everybody in the world is seeing delinquencies rise, some more so than others. Credit card delinquencies are rising fast. Auto loan delinquencies are rising very fast. And look, people know if you miss your car payment, they're going to come repo your car. So if somebody's missing their car payment, why would they be paying their buy now, pay later loan and not their car payment? Their car payment goes on their credit report and they take the car back. The BNPL loan does not go on the credit report, and they're not going to take the TV back or take the sweater back or the groceries you bought with it back. So it just doesn't pass the sniff test that a firm is like, oh, our delinquencies are 2.4% when auto delinquencies are pushing 9%. It's too good to be true. And when things seem too good to be true, it's usually because they are. And by the way, he has a financial incentive to understate delinquencies because most of the revenue at a firm, besides fees, it comes from securitization, selling that debt to unsuspecting investors who apparently are buying his delinquency numbers. I just don't believe it. That's all. I mean, I don't have the proof to say, definitively they're lying, but everybody else is seeing delinquencies go up, and a firm who uses Cross River Bank, who's notorious for rubber stamping BS loans, they're supposedly have this wonderful algorithm that's so perfectly able to handicap risk. No. Just doesn't pass the sniff test. I don't believe it. Good point, Mish, on BNPL. Now, what was the second part of his question here? Do you think people are maxing out or paying down? I'm going to go on maxing out. I'm leaning towards maxing out. I think the banks are probably starting to get a little tighter on their lending standards. They're starting to be a little bit more careful because of those rising delinquencies. We've definitely seen that in the auto space, right? The few that stayed, like last year, a lot of banks stopped lending to auto. They just got out of it altogether. And Ally Financial and Capital One decided they were going to stay in. And both of them are seeing big spikes in auto delinquencies, in particular of the 22 and 23 vintage loans that they made when car prices were astronomically high. So I think credit standards are probably starting to tighten a little bit, at least in credit cards. And I think that's why this is starting to level off a little bit. The consumer's just broke. He's getting cut off. It's a good question, Jose, and very astute observation. Thank you, sir, for supporting the channel. And the inflation situation says, JG, I honestly don't know how we get anything other than the stagflation unless deflation or a productivity boom. Productivity boom. Hey, AI is a thing. Maybe we do get this big boom in productivity. It's possible. I'm skeptical of AI, as you guys know. but that's possible. Deflation, if we were to take our hands off the panel and just let the ship go where it wants to go, we would definitely go towards deflation. But our powers that be will not take their hands off the panel. They just won't. They don't know how to. We saw during the banking crisis how quickly they'll push that money print button. We see every time things get bad, they immediately opt for monetary debasement as a solution to the problem. And I see no reason to suspect they'll do something different this time. They already cut 50 basis points, guys. So, they're telling us they will lean dovish in lieu of any further information every time. So I think probably we do go the way of some form of stagflation eventually, or just outright inflation, TIS. The West is clearly deindustrializing. Am I nuts or just a jerk? LOL. I'm not going to comment on that last one. You seem like a nice guy to me through the filter of the interwebs. Is the West deindustrializing? I think Europe is definitely deindustrializing. The U.S., we lost manufacturing jobs in this last report, but we are making these big investments in the CHIPS Act, and there's a lot of onshoring and reshoring. At least ostensibly, that's what's happening in the market. So I don't know that the U.S. is deindustrializing. There are certainly forces in that direction, but there are some signs of hope that the U.S. manufacturing base is making a comeback. So I wouldn't say the West outright. Certainly Europe is deindustrializing. I mean, they're trying to get by on unicorns and rainbows over in Europe. Good luck. Good luck with that one. I'm sure Greta has a great economic plan for the success of that continent, and I just look forward to sharing in that success and basking in its glory if and when that finally happens. Thank you very much to the inflation situation. I appreciate the support of the channel. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for everything. Where were we? We were about to talk about Bitcoin. 62,314. Bitcoin is ripping higher today, along with the NASDAQ, up $1,570 as priced on Coinbase, about 2.5% higher. Looking at commodities, though, gold not doing so good, down about $7. But considering what the dollar and what the yields are doing today, gold is holding up very, very well. So be glad gold isn't down $50 today, considering what the rest of the market is doing here. I think take that for the win that it is. Silver's looking even better. It's actually up 19 cents, 0.6% higher at 32.22. Although intraday, we hit a high of almost $33 on spot silver. So we're well off the highs here, but still having a pretty good day. Copper's up about 0.5%. Platinum is down 0.25%. Palladium's up 1%. Again, the metals are holding up pretty good here. Oil up a full 1%, 79 cents higher. Let's talk briefly about oil, guys, because we got some things on Twitter. I mentioned, where is it? Here we go. I mentioned this morning, pay attention to this. This is Kark Island, all right? Or Kark Island. I don't know how you pronounce it. Most people say Kark. Kark Island in Iran. This is the most likely, in my opinion, target. If the Israelis are really trying to hurt the Iranian economy with their counterattack, then this is what they'll hit. All of the boats left this spot last night as soon as President Biden let slip that they were talking with the Israelis about hitting the oil facilities, which means the captains were like, I'm not sitting around waiting for the F-35s to show up. Thank you, Mish, again, for that data point. Mish was all over that story yesterday. And then we got some interesting talking points today. All right, so let's get a little political here for a second. President Biden today made his first appearance in the White House briefing room of his presidency. Oh, my God. We're almost 4 years in. He's already dropped out of his reelection bid. Now he makes his first appearance in the White House press briefing room. Let's admire that for what it is. All right. Most transparent in the history of everything. Oh, nice of you to finally talk to the freaking press. Maybe bring Kamala next time. Anyways, President Biden in the White House briefing room said today, and when asked about a question, are the Israelis potentially interfering with the election? Now, this was in the context of their unwillingness to sign any kind of diplomatic agreement, but also keep in mind, this is in the context of the comments Biden made yesterday about how they are in negotiations about what the Israelis are going to hit in their response to the Iranian missile attack. President Biden said, no administration has helped Israel more than I have. None. Awkward repetition of none aside, he goes on to say, and I think maybe Bibi should remember that in reference to British Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I think Bibi should remember
Israeli Prime Minister, not British.
Did I say British? I'm sorry.
You did.
Yeah, that was a Freudian
slip. Trying to cut that off in the chat right now.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know why I said British, or I wasn't even thinking British. Maybe when I hear Prime Minister, I think England. Maybe that's why I said that. Thank you, Bish, for clarifying that. You got to jump in because I sometimes use Israel and Iran interchangeably as well, and they're pretty far apart on the spectrum, you might have guessed. Anyways, this was a pretty stern message here. And it looks like Biden decided to make his first appearance in the White House briefing room ever as president for the sole purpose of sending a message to the Israelis. There's suggestions here that talks with the Israelis are broken down, that the Israelis are going to do what they want and not what Biden wants. And remember this island, guys. If this thing gets blown up, that is an October surprise, because you better believe that is going to send oil prices sharply higher. And sharply higher oil prices is not good for Biden and his people come next month. All right. So I suspect what's going on here is the Israelis are wanting to hit the oil facilities. And then Biden would go on. This is now from Giovanni Stanovo, who's saying, Biden says, I think if I were in their shoes, referring to the Israelis, not the British, I'd be thinking about other alternatives than striking oil fields. So look, Biden is like trying this in the court of public opinion, if you will. He's taken his message via the press instead of, so it almost suggests like he's trying to put distance between himself and what's about to happen. This is not good. And I think the oil market is reacting to this. That's why we got higher oil prices today. All right. That being said, let's get into the jobs numbers, because we got to talk about these jobs numbers here, guys. Check out this tweet from Mohammed El Arian. This jumped out at me today as well. He says, taken at face value, this is a blowout U.S. jobs report. Impressive job creation, 254,000, a lower unemployment rate at 4.1%, and buoyant monthly wage growth at 0.4%. All are notably better than consensus forecasts. He goes on to make several more very bullish statements about the labor market. I could not help but notice taken at face value. All right. Mohammed El Arian starts this tweet by saying taken at face value. All right. In my opinion, when somebody leads with taken at face value, it's because they don't take it at face value. He's saying hypothetically, if you believe these numbers, then this is a really good jobs report. So now Mohammed El Arian is your typical like Bloomberg CNBC guy. He is not a doomer. He's very much, I don't want to say he's a cheerleader. I'll give the guy a little bit more credit than that. I don't find him to be like an all-out cheerleader like a lot of people in the space are, but he is not a doomer by any measure. So he's kind of throwing a little shade here. He's not quite saying it, but it's like, hey, Mo, tell us how you really feel here. Taken at face value. That's a qualifier that he's throwing in there to insulate himself so he doesn't have to stand in front of these jobs numbers and be held responsible for their authenticity. Right. So I take that as very skeptical. On top of that, I got this one, by the way. Great shout out to Frog Capital, who's at Frog News on Twitter. He's usually pretty good with the data points. And he's pointing to table A of the jobs report here and about the household survey. And he's saying the survey says we added 430,000 jobs while 75,000 people left the labor force. Now, remember, guys, that 430,000 jobs in the household survey, the number that gets reported on CNBC, the big headline number, that is the establishment survey. But there's two different surveys, households and establishment. Household survey was even better, said we added 430,000 jobs. Now, here's the problem, guys. Until today, until this report, the average monthly gain for the household survey in 2024 has been 31,000 jobs. All right, that was the average. So we are looking at a 14 standard deviation bump in the household survey. All right. This is another point. When the move is 14 times the average, it has to make you wonder. It has to make you doubt it. And Frog is right to call this out. All right. We've been averaging 31,000 plus or minus all year. All of a sudden, boom, 430,000. This was a huge report. It's borderline too good to be true. All right. So, and Frog Capital, Mohammed El Arian, they're not the only ones who are out here kind of slow walking this report, right? They're all running with the headlines on the front page, best economy ever. And then on page 19, they're running stories like this. Record seasonal adjustment tones down blowout U.S. job reports. All right. You're not going to, probably won't find this on the front page of Bloomberg, but if you hunt for it, you might find it. You know, they don't have to explain it. They'll say, oh, we told you it was a record seasonal adjustment, even though we didn't make any effort to get that message in front of you. We just put it out there to cover our face while we cheerlead for the economy. U.S. job growth blew past every estimate in September, but a good chunk of the surge may reflect how the government adjusts the numbers. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, which compiles the employment report, uses a model to fine-tune the raw change in payrolls to better account for seasonal factors like summertime fluctuations when teachers are off. Construction jobs are typically booming in the summer. Restaurants hire additional staff. That way, the numbers are more easily comparable month to month. But last month's so-called seasonal factor, which is calculated by dividing the total seasonally adjusted payrolls count by the unadjusted figures, was the largest for any September on record going back to 2002. All right, so this was a big seasonal adjustment. Now, we mentioned how, look, September is hard to get right because of the big shift in the labor market, because of the end of summer jobs and the teachers going back to work. There's a lot of teachers in this country. All right. It's really hard to get a comparable month over month number. They try to make the numbers comparable with the seasonal fudge factor. The seasonal adjustment. This was the biggest seasonal adjustment ever. All right. So that's another thing that at the very least makes you somewhat question the validity of these numbers. And again, the last paragraph of Bloomberg usually has a good nugget hiding in it. This one is no exception. The extremely low response rate to this payroll survey was a red flag. Only 62% of establishments responded to this survey. That's according to Samuel Toombs, chief U.S. economist at Pantheon Macro. We think that small businesses are disproportionately late responders and are cutting back on hiring more than large businesses. And we're convinced, therefore, that September's print will be revised much lower over the coming months. And guys, I can tell you, we saw that over and over again in the comments this morning on that morning live stream and in the live chat. People were saying they're just going to seasonally adjust it down later. Well, the low response rate somewhat supports that as well. So that's one reason to question the numbers. It doesn't mean it's an outright lie, all right? We're still not just pointing and shouting, you lie. But we've got another one. Was there a September surprise in the shocking U.S. jobs report? Here's a few clues. This is from Jeffrey Bartash at MarketWatch. The September jobs report showing a big 254,000 increase in employment may have been flattered by seasonal adjustments. There's that seasonal adjustment again. Now, he goes on to talk about how there's always seasonal adjustments, all right, the lone exception being the pandemic in 2020. But here's the thing. Before the adjustments, if you look at the non-seasonally adjusted numbers, you end up with a private sector that actually shed 458,000 jobs in September, but a government sector that added 918,000. Now, before we go and we scream, oh my God, it's all government jobs, let's keep in mind here, teachers going back to work, and these are not seasonally adjusted numbers. So you would expect a lot of jumps in government employment in the month of September because teachers are government jobs. Actually, teachers tend to be local government jobs. And if you break out the data in the jobs report, you actually see that a big portion of the government jobs that were gained were actually in local government. So again, September, it's a hard month to get right. This was the biggest seasonal correction ever. And when you take away the non-seasonally adjusted numbers, you actually see some pretty big changes. Now, let's get into table A9 because this is where it got pretty interesting for me. Now, I usually go into table A9. This is where we see the full-time and the part-time jobs changes, right? I go through this one every week. Now, for the last year or so, we've seen a trend of losing full-time jobs and gaining part-time jobs, gaining multiple job holders, gaining gig work. Well, we saw some of that this month, but not nearly as much. All right, first things first, full-time jobs. We actually gained full-time jobs this month in the seasonally adjusted numbers, 133.66 million versus 133.246 million. All right, now remember, these numbers are in thousands. That's why I'm pronouncing it as millions. So the seasonally adjusted full-time jobs for this month was actually up by 414,000. That's the seasonally adjusted. Now remember, guys, seasonal adjustment tries to account for teachers going back to work. So we should see a gain, and then when they seasonally adjust it, we should see that gain going away, leaving us with only the actual increase in full-time jobs. Well, we actually saw a pretty big increase in full-time jobs, 414,000. This is the household survey, but guys, this kind of defies belief here. Do we really think the economy added 414,000 full-time jobs in the last quarter? What sector is booming so much that you would see that? Now, the unseasonally adjusted numbers, that was even more interesting. Let's look at the month-over-month non-seasonally adjusted numbers. This is where we get pretty wild here. Non-seasonally adjusted, where we don't account for what happens every year, we went from 134.396 to 134.145. Guys, non-seasonally adjusted, we lost full-time workers. So understand this, guys. Like this, everything that they just said about the seasonal adjustment and the teachers, right? That's not what we actually saw, though. The non-seasonally adjusted numbers, we lost full-time jobs in the last month. We lost 251,000 of them. Now, what they're supposed to do with the seasonal adjustment is skew the full-time numbers lower, right? Because teachers going back to work, we don't want to count those as jobs gained. We want to smooth it out for seasonal factors. But that's not what the seasonal adjustment did. The seasonal adjustment took the household survey full-time jobs number higher by over 650,000. We went from negative 251 non-seasonal to positive 414 seasonal. That doesn't pass the sniff test. All right. That if we're trying to say it's just the seasonality and the teachers going back to work, we should see the opposite in this survey. So that's another thing that it's, again, I'm not just going to point and say lie, but it does make you doubt these numbers here. Now, the part-time workers, we got some similar questionable numbers here. Let's start with seasonal adjusted, 28.16 million versus 28.256 million. So we have actually lost part-time workers on this jobs report, 95,000 seasonally adjusted. Now, if we go to the non-seasonally adjusted, we went from 26.953 million to 27.901 million. Wait, what? We actually gained 948,000 part-time jobs in September. That's the not seasonally adjusted. That's very important. Not seasonally adjusted. So all the kids who went back to school and quit their part-time jobs, and yet somehow we gained almost 1 million part-time jobs while losing 251,000 full-time. Again, the seasonal adjustment is supposed to go in the other direction. Seasonal adjustment is supposed to skew part-time jobs in September lower. It's supposed to skew part-time jobs higher. It's supposed to skew full-time jobs lower, but it didn't do that. It did the opposite here. So a not seasonally adjusted increase of 948,000 part-time jobs in the month of September. Does that pass the sniff test to you guys? Can anybody explain how we would possibly see an increase of almost 1 million part-time jobs after everybody quits their summer jobs? That does not make sense to me at all. And I've tried to reason this out. I've tried all kinds of like thought exercises. It just doesn't make sense to me. I cannot make these numbers make sense. Multiple job holders, by the way, multiple job holders, we saw an increase of 121,000 seasonally adjusted. If you not seasonally adjust it, we saw a huge increase in multiple job holders of 412,000. Now, once again, guys, the multiple job holders number, that big increase, that actually makes a little sense, and it actually lends a little bit of credibility to the part-time work figure jumping by almost 1 million. Because if people are getting second jobs, it's probably not a second full-time job. They're probably getting a part-time job on top of that. But again, not seasonally adjusted. A big jump in multiple job holders doesn't really make a lot of sense to me here. And then self-employed, we actually lost some gig workers here. Self-employed unincorporated down by 256,000 for this month. And actually, we actually saw very little seasonal adjustment in that number. We were down by 280,000 in the non-seasonally adjusted. So those two numbers, the self-employed unincorporated, i.e. your Uber and Lyft drivers, pretty much unchanged by the seasonal adjustment there. guys, these numbers don't make a lot of sense to me. Mish, what are your thoughts? I mean, you had a theory. I mean, and I'll give you credit for at least theorizing. Maybe more college kids are working now, like while going back to school. It's possible, right? Like, where would these part-time jobs come from?
So the reason I said about the college workers is we didn't really fully get to talk about this. The society today is when your kid comes home from college, you don't put them to work. You let them hang out for the summer. So yeah, no, it is what it is, right? So you don't make them work. So then they get back to college and they have to get a job again because they're not living at home. So they need to be able to buy food. So that's why I think it jumped up so much. And then we also talked about how there's a lot more local restaurants opening by chains that are shutting down, because in every Red Lobster that shuts down, a Mexican restaurant opens up, and hoo-yah.
Yeah, we've seen fast casual restaurants have done all right. I mean, that's a good point about restaurants, right? Because the chain data, it's publicly reported companies, so you get that every time, right? That's easier to track. But the mom and pops, they're a little harder to track. Let's talk about the restaurant number here, because this CNBC article showed leisure and hospitality, 78,000 jobs gained in the September jobs report. And it's not just restaurants doing bad, hotels are doing bad too. So, the category that saw the biggest gains in jobs is the category that has seen besides autos, maybe the most bad news in the last few months, at least in my opinion, based on what I've seen. But again, to your point, Mish, I don't see what mom and pop restaurants are doing. I see what Longhorn Steakhouse is doing. I see what Darden is doing, right? What Red Lobster bankruptcy is doing. I see the big chains, not the small ones. And I think there is probably a pretty significant grassroots effort to support local restaurants. I think the John Q. public is probably turned off by the restaurant chains a little bit and would like to see a return to that nostalgia of the local restaurant. Maybe that's playing out.
Local restaurants are typically cheaper than chain restaurants because you don't have that franchise fee you have to kind of bake in. So that's why the local bar has, $1 drinks all the time and, hamburgers that are $3.
And better food, I think, too. I always find the local places have better food than the chains. That's just my opinion. Because the ones that suck go out of business so fast. They just don't make it beyond their first few months. But while all these jobs are being gained in leisure and hospitality, I wanted to point to this. This is from the National Restaurant Association. This is the Restaurant Performance Index. Now, this is a lot like those purchasing managers indexes where a number below 100 shows an industry in decline, a number above 100 shows an industry in growth. And the point I want to make here is, this data goes all the way back to 2004. But if you look here, for the last 9 consecutive months, the Restaurant Performance Index has been below 100, showing the restaurant industry in contraction. For 9 consecutive months, again, that calls into question this number that says all of a sudden 78,000 in leisure and hospitality. And this number, it's not just the chains. This number also includes your mom and pops. So it's a little bit more even split. So again, this is just one of those things that just makes you think, man, these numbers just don't really smell right to me. I just want to get a couple more thank yous in, by the way. My buddy, Real Estate Mindset. Thank you so much, Travis. I appreciate the super chat. 777, I win. All right. That's my first 777 super chat. What a specific number. It's my lucky day. Thank you, Travis. Appreciate the support of the channel, brother. Looking forward to talking with you and Melody on Doomers News Network over the weekend. I'll see you tomorrow around lunchtime. And thank you again to Jose Orozco for the super sticker. Thank you very much, sir. What does Jose sends? Good vibes with an upside down smiley face. I think he's trying to poke fun at the government statistics there. Am I interpreting your smiley face accurately, Jose? That's what I take away from it with the upside down smiley. Thanks again, brother. Appreciate the super chat and the support of the channel. We're getting a little long in the tooth here, so I want to stick to some of the numbers that really blew me away. Okay, one more thing that really stuck out at me. There was a lot of people were talking about big jumps in government jobs. I did see that as well. There was a big jump in government jobs. Again, you would expect that in September because of the teachers going back to work, and teachers are government jobs. So you would expect the big spike in government jobs. But I found something in table A7 that I also wanted to point out because this does not pass the sniff test. Now, table A7, this is when we get into the immigration policy, all right? And I just want to say, guys, if you get offended by this, you can call our complaint line, 1-800, who gives a shit? These are just numbers. Numbers don't care about feelings, and we're just going to report them, all right? Now, there was some things in here that don't really make sense. Table A7, again, household survey, not the establishment survey. But they're talking about foreign-born versus native-born, and I would also add foreign-born also includes legal immigrants, illegal immigrants, and it also includes a lot of U.S. citizens, people who were born in other countries. It just means you were not a U.S. citizen at birth. All right?
You could have been in the United States for 50 years.
Yes, or you could have been born in Europe, immigrated at age 10, and you've been here ever since legally, right? Like it's a very broad number, but it also does include illegal immigration. It doesn't call that out specifically, but it's the number that captures it, right? With the understanding that there's other numbers in there. Now, here's what kind of jumped out at me. We're going to start with the foreign-born 16 years and over population. Look at the civilian population, 48,800,000, so 48.8 million. Now, this is just year over year numbers that they're showing here, September versus September of last year. So I went back to last month's jobs report stream. And last month, the civilian non-institutional population, foreign-born in the United States, was 48,853. So the foreign-born population of the United States, according to this jobs report, went down by 53,000 last month. Does not pass the sniff test, guys. There are not fewer foreign-born people in the United States this month than there were a month ago. It doesn't pass the sniff. Maybe the hurricane season delayed immigration a little bit, but that just means it slowed down people entering. It did not reverse the flow. The flow of immigration did not suddenly reverse in the month of September. So that number is I'm very skeptical of that number. And then when you look at the foreign-born, again, legal and illegal immigrants, foreign-born, 31,414,000 employed. Last month, that was 31,636,000. So we actually saw a decline of 222,000 foreign-born people working in the United States in the month of September. In this jobs report, again, it doesn't pass the sniff test. I really don't believe that there are 53,000 fewer foreign-born people living in the U.S. and 222,000 fewer working in the U.S. It just shows that there was some change to the numbers, some big shift. Was it seasonal adjustment? I don't think they seasonally adjust the population. Yeah, this is not seasonally adjusted. It says it right here. So, I can't really explain that. All I can say is it just doesn't make sense. And likewise, when you look at the native-born population. Now, keep in mind, guys, that the native-born population in the U.S. has been falling for years. We have not been making enough babies in the United States, not even close for years. We've been below the replacement rate. Europe is worse. Japan is even worse. China's even worse. South Korea is worse than everybody. The North, the global North, is not having enough babies. So that being said, how is the civilian non-institutional population in the United States 220,280,000 when a month ago it was 220,003,000? So somehow we now have 277,000 more native-born people in the United States than we had a month ago. And remember, our birth rate has not changed, all right? 9 months ago, we didn't all have a party, and now all of a sudden there's babies being born that don't look like dad, right? That didn't happen all of a sudden this month. So where did these 277,000 people born in the United States, 16 years and older, come from in the month of September? Magic. That's where they came from. And then when you look at the employed number, again, for the last year, we have been watching the number of employed native-born people fall rapidly to the tune of several million. 130,632,000 employed working in the United States, native-born. A month ago, that was 129,712,000. That is a change of 920,000, almost a million more native-born, 16 years and older, working in the United States in the month of September versus the month of August. Where did these million people come from that are now suddenly working? What were they doing before? It does not make sense, all right? The demographics in this country are doing the opposite. We have fewer native-born people. We have more foreign-born people in this country. That is not a controversial statement. That is a freaking statement of fact. And then all of a sudden, that trend reverses bigly this month. And look, this doesn't explain why the jobs report was so good, but these are numbers in the jobs report that just make no freaking sense in a report that is full of numbers that just make no freaking sense. Make it make sense, because this report has none. And again, guys, there was other things like big jumps in government jobs. Those are a little easier to explain away by the teachers going back to work. But then why did the household survey show that huge gain of part-time jobs and that huge loss of full-time jobs if the teachers are all going back to work? There's so many things in this report that just don't make sense. Now, does that mean it's a lie? No, it just means the numbers don't make sense. But you got a lot of numbers that don't make sense in a report that has been notorious for huge downward revisions after the fact and close proximity to the election. Look, guys, you were all skeptical of the jobs reports this morning in the comments. I was skeptical as well, hence donning the tinfoil hat for the entirety of the stream. Merchandising, yay. But there's plenty of things in this report that don't add up. All right, and I guess that's kind of where I would wrap that one up. I don't know. Help me out in the comments here, guys. What explains this? What could explain this besides they're lying? All right, and I'm not saying they're not lying. I'm just saying it's too easy to just say they're lying. All right, it's harder to point to the report and look at the numbers and say, "There, I caught you. There's the lie." Right? It almost feels like accounting. Now, there's a lot of red flags in this report. There's a lot of incongruities. Is that a word? I don't know. There's a lot of things, inconsistencies, things that don't jibe with the lived experience on the ground of most people. But that being said, there's also no like smoking gun that says, here's where they're lying. So let me know what I missed in the comments, guys. Market is closed here. Why don't we take one last trip through the markets and see where we ended the week? The S&P ended up closing at the high of the day, caught a bid into the close. S&P 57,050, up 50 points on the day. Did we close at an all-time high? Not quite. Not quite an all-time high. We were higher on Monday, but still the S&P looking pretty good here. The Dow ended up closing up 341 points, again catching a bid into the close, 0.8% higher at 42,352. The Dow ATH, a new all-time high, new record for the Dow right there. Big green candle up. NASDAQ also at the high of the day, 18,134, up 216 points or 1.21% higher. NASDAQ, though, not at an all-time high, although did it close up for the week? Yep, up for the week. So it was a positive week across the board for stocks. Yet again, not quite an all-time high, though. Bigly positive week for the dollar. Keep an eye on that. Bigly positive week for the 10-year yield, especially today. Keep an eye on that. And, of course, bigly positive week for the jobs report, which just defies logic. All right. So are we going to see a big downward revision? My guess, probably. Is it going to be to the tune of 150,000? Probably not. I mean, I don't think it'll be that big. I mean, there was some indicators we were going to have a good jobs report, or at least a less lousy jobs report. The JOLTS were pretty good. ADP, private payrolls were pretty good. The weekly jobless claims have been down for a few weeks in a row. So, I mean, there was enough mildly positive indicators out there to at least suggest this jobs report would be better than the last one, but nothing was screaming 250,000 jobs created. Nothing that good.
Yeah, you thought I was crazy when I told you that I thought the unemployment would come down to 4.1.
It did. Not only that, Mitch, the unemployment came down to 4.051.
Mm-hmm.
You were 0.02 of a point from unemployment coming down even lower than the number I told you were crazy. Because I didn't think we would see it, because when we were 4.2 last month, we were right around the cutoff of 4.243. So that drop from 4.2 to 4.1 was actually bigger than it looked.
Well, if you go back to the reports, you'll find that most people, September 27th, most people had a really bad July, and then August got better. So if August got better than July, that means they would hire people for September. And I think that's what we got.
Do you think the rate cuts, right? The rate cuts came on the 18th.
So rate cuts basically mean cheaper money, right?
Yeah. Do you think, say you're a business and you're like on the fence, am I going to hire? Aren't I going to hire? And then the rate cuts come in. Is that enough to make enough businesses across the country say, all right, at least the Fed is not trying to put me out of business anymore. I'm going to go ahead and hire those people that I wasn't. Could it have been a one-time surge of hiring from the rate cut? People waiting?
Maybe.
Would it even show up?
I don't know if it would have got counted, right? Because the rate cut was what, the 17th?
The 18th was when they announced it. Yep.
So I don't know if it got counted or not.
That's a good point.
I don't know when they pushed the button.
And if that's the case, like when do they cut off right? Because they probably don't. They probably cut off the counting of jobs at some point in late September. I doubt it's October 1st that they stop counting, right? So that could mean there's another surge on the horizon for October, couldn't it? If, say, the surge in hiring from the rate cuts didn't make it into this report, geez, maybe there's another big one coming next month too. So more questions than answers. Sorry, guys. I'd love to be able to point to a smoking gun and say this is what happened definitively. There's plenty of things that are make you more doubtful, but nothing definitive here. Sorry, guys. But that being said, a lot of the things in this report don't pass the sniff test. So I share your skepticism, but I stop short of just pointing and saying you lie. I find it's too lazy. It's too easy to do that. And it's too dismissive, and it doesn't let you off the hook for supporting your position with evidence and with data. Yes, it is the government. No, I don't trust them. But even when you're lying in numbers, math doesn't lie. It's usually easy to find it where the lie is. It wasn't that easy this time. So plenty of things that don't make sense. How that translates into a 254,000 jobs beat, I don't know, guys. Anyways, Mish, you got anything you want to throw in to wrap up the stream, brother?
Yeah, let's forget sometimes that never assume malice when ignorance is a viable option, because most people are not that mean.
Yeah, I agree with that. And on top of that, we'll requote George Carlin. We just quoted him yesterday. Picture how stupid the average person is, and then remember, half of them are dumber than that. And so those two sentences in combination, maybe it's just stupidity. I don't know. Stranger things have happened, guys. It is the 2020s. Thank you very much, Mish, for being on the stream. Once again, guys, keep an eye on Carg Island over the weekend. Yeah, that's all. That will tell us if they hit that island, we know they were trying to hurt them. If they don't hit that island, if they hit something else, something smaller, it means they just need to rattle their sabers. They just need to save face, and then we can go back to hating each other through proxies like we've been doing for years. If they hit that island, though, that is a major escalation. Get ready for sharply higher gas prices if they hit that island, especially if the Iranians retaliate the way I think they would retaliate to that. It's going to be an interesting next couple of days, guys. All right. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your Friday afternoon with us. Thank you to all the Melonheads, magnanimous Melonheads on Patreon and YouTube for supporting the channel. Thank you, everybody, for the super chats. I appreciate the generosity. I'll be on the Doomers News Network, DNN, tomorrow morning with my friends Travis and Melody. Once again, thank you, Mish, and all the Blue Wrenches. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. I love you guys and everybody. Till next time, live small and dream big.